The manila envelope sat unopened on Thomas Miller's mahogany desk, its gold embossing catching the late afternoon sunlight that filtered through the high-rise office windows. The familiar scent of coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the leather of his executive chair. As regional sales director at Maxwell Technologies, Thomas knew exactly what it contained: the annual invitation to CEO Daniel Harrison's birthday celebration, an event that had become the company's most anticipated social gathering. His fingers drummed against the desk's polished surface as his thoughts drifted to Olivia Chen, the marketing director whose arrival 6 months ago had upended his carefully structured life. Their initial coffee meetings to discuss cross-departmental projects had evolved into lingering lunches and subtle touches that left his skin burning. At 38, Thomas found himself caught between his 15-year marriage to Emma and an attraction that made him feel simultaneously alive and ashamed. The invitation represented more than just another corporate event. Emma, recently promoted to head of pediatric surgery, had mentioned a conference in Boston scheduled for the same weekend. The timing felt like a sign, though the thought made his stomach clench with guilt. Their marriage had become a series of quick exchanges about schedules and brief conversations over reheated dinners. Emma's surgical residency had tested their relationship, but her new position had transformed their home into a way station between hospital shifts. His office phone buzzed, the harsh sound cutting through his thoughts. "Mr. Miller, Miss Chen is here for your 3 o'clock, his assistant announced, her tone professionally neutral. "Send her in, Sarah," he replied, quickly tucking the invitation into his desk drawer. The leather folder containing quarterly reports sat ready on his desk, a prop in what had become an elaborate performance. Olivia entered, her presence immediately changing the energy in the room. Her charcoal gray suit was impeccably tailored, and the subtle scent of her perfume, something exotic with notes of jasmine, filled the space between them. "Working late again?" she asked, dark eyes holding his gaze as she settled into the chair across from him. That evening, Thomas sat in his parked Tesla outside their colonial-style home, watching shadows move across the kitchen windows. The invitation had migrated from his desk drawer to his briefcase, where it seemed to carry the weight of far more than paper. Through the window, he could see Emma moving between the stove and counter, her surgical precision evident even in the way she chopped vegetables for another meal she'd likely miss. His phone vibrated against the leather seat. Olivia's message glowed in the growing darkness. "Did you think about what we discussed? The marketing proposal needs your sign-off by Friday." The seemingly innocent text carried a double meaning that made his pulse quicken. They'd perfected the art of professional pretense, embedding personal messages within work-related communications. The distance between his car and front door felt longer than usual. Inside, the house smelled of garlic and herbs, a reminder of earlier years when they'd cooked together, wine glasses in hand, planning their future between stolen kisses. Now, Emma stood at the kitchen island, her reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed patient files while stirring sauce with her free hand. "The Boston conference is next weekend," she mentioned without looking up, her tone casual, but distracted. "I should be back Sunday evening. Dr. Matthews is covering my on-call hours." Thomas nodded, relief and guilt warring in his chest as he loosened his tie. "I've got that work thing anyway, Daniel's birthday celebration." "Oh, right," Emma replied, highlighting something in her notes. "Send him my regrets. I've been meaning to catch up with Patricia, but this conference..." She trailed off, finally looking up at him. For a brief moment, something flickered in her eyes. Concern, perhaps, or recognition of their growing distance. But it vanished as her pager buzzed. "Emergency consult," she explained, already reaching for her keys. "Dinner's almost ready. Don't wait up." The sound of the garage door closing echoed through the empty kitchen. Thomas stared at the half-prepared meal, then pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over Olivia's message before typing. "Proposal approved. Let's discuss the details tomorrow." What Thomas didn't know was that Emma had been living with her own secrets. The Boston conference had been canceled 2 weeks ago, but she'd maintained the pretense, hoping to surprise Thomas at Daniel's party. After 15 years of marriage, the growing silence between them had become deafening. Her surgical training had taught her to identify problems early, to catch issues before they became critical. She'd missed the warning signs in her own marriage, but she refused to lose another patient. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" Sophia asked, holding up a midnight blue dress in the fitting room of Neiman Marcus. The boutique's soft lighting and champagne service couldn't mask her friend's concern. As Emma's confidant since their med school days, Sophia had watched the marriage slowly deteriorate. Unlike Emma, she'd noticed the telltale signs, the late meetings, the changed passwords, the new cologne that sometimes lingered on Thomas's dry cleaning. "I've been so focused on my career, Sophia." Emma emerged from behind the velvet curtain, smoothing the silk dress over her curves. Years of hospital cafeteria meals and surgery marathons had left her slimmer than she'd like. But the dress hugged her body in all the right places. "Maybe this is what we need, one evening away from mortality rates and quarterly reports." Sophia's phone buzzed in her designer bag. The message from Jessica in radiology made her stomach turn. "Saw your friend's husband at La Maison." Again, same marketing woman, holding hands this time. Sophia deleted it immediately, her heart heavy with knowledge she couldn't share. "The alterations will be ready by Thursday," the saleswoman announced, marking the hem with practiced efficiency. "Will you be wearing this to a special occasion?" "My husband's company party," Emma replied, a determined smile crossing her face. "It's time to remind him why he fell in love with me in the first place." The Harrison mansion dominated. The hillside, its Mediterranean architecture glowing warmly against the twilight sky. Thomas handed his Tesla key to the valet, hyper-aware of Olivia's presence beside him. Her red dress caught the light from the garden lanterns, the fabric moving like liquid fire with each step. The scent of jasmine followed them up the marble steps, mixing with the evening air and the faint music drifting from inside. "Relax," Olivia whispered, her hand finding the crook of his arm. "Everyone here thinks we're just colleagues." But her smile held a hint of triumph that made his chest tighten. This was what she'd wanted, to step out of the shadows of quick lunches and hidden messages. The grand foyer buzzed with Silicon Valley's elite, venture capitalists in bespoke suits, tech innovators trying too hard to look casual, and executives who carried power like a favorite cologne. Crystal chandeliers cast shifting patterns across marble floors, while waiters navigated the crowd with trays of champagne and carefully curated hors d'oeuvres. Daniel spotted them immediately, his imposing figure cutting through the crowd with practiced ease. His customized Thomas Ford suit and salt-and-pepper hair projected success without trying, the result of old money meeting new technology. "Thomas!" Daniel's handshake was firm, his smile genuine but his eyes sharp. "Glad you could make it." He turned to Olivia, one eyebrow lifting slightly. "Miss Chen, what a—" He paused, his gaze flicking between them with sudden understanding. "Surprise, I thought." "Emma sends her regrets," Thomas cut in, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter to steady his nerves. "She's at a conference in Boston." Daniel's expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes changed. "Of course," he replied, his tone carrying a weight Thomas chose to ignore. "Patricia will be disappointed. She was hoping to catch up with Emma tonight." The evening progressed in a haze of networking and forced laughter. Thomas had just settled into a rhythm, discussing Q3 projections with a venture capitalist, when the room's atmosphere shifted. The steady hum of conversation faltered, replaced by a ripple of whispers that drew his attention to the entrance. Emma stood in the doorway, and time seemed to stop. The midnight blue silk dress caught the light, making her appear to glow from within. Her honey-blonde hair, usually hastily pulled back for surgery, fell in soft waves around her shoulders. For a moment, Thomas saw her as she'd been on their wedding day, radiant, full of promise, looking at him like he held all the answers. Then reality crashed in as he felt Olivia's hand tense on his sleeve. The room held its collective breath. Emma's eyes found his, then moved to Olivia's hand on his arm, then back to his face. The color drained from her cheeks, but 15 years of delivering both miracles and tragedies had taught her how to maintain composure. Her spine straightened. Imperceptibly, her chin lifted. The same stance she took before making the first incision in a difficult surgery. "Well," Patricia Harrison said into the suffocating silence, her social training kicking in, "this is certainly unexpected." She moved toward Emma with the grace of someone accustomed to smoothing over difficult situations. But Emma's slight headshake stopped her. The clicking of Emma's heels against the marble floor echoed through the room as she made her way to the bar, each step measured and deliberate. The whispers followed her movement, spreading through the crowd like a virus. Emma accepted a glass of champagne from the bartender, her surgeon's hand steady despite the tremors she felt inside. Her mind shifted into trauma protocol. Assess the situation, identify the damage, determine the best course of action. The curious eyes of Silicon Valley's elite burned against her skin, their whispers creating a background hum that reminded her of hospital monitors. Emma, Thomas's voice came from behind her, strained and hollow. "I thought you were in Boston." The words hung in the air between them, as sterile and useless as an unneeded surgical instrument. "Clearly," she replied, her voice carrying just enough to reach nearby guests. The champagne tasted like ash on her tongue. "And I thought you were my husband." The statement was precise, clinical, a diagnosis delivered without emotion. Olivia attempted to slip away, her red dress a splash of blood in Emma's peripheral vision. "Please stay, Miss Chen." Emma's quiet voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. "I believe we have quite a lot to discuss. Professional courtesy, at the very least." The tension in the room became unbearable. Daniel quickly announced dinner, herding guests toward the dining room like a shepherd protecting his flock from an approaching storm. But Emma remained rooted in place, her empty champagne glass now an anchor in her grip. "Emma, please," Thomas pleaded, reaching for her arm. His cologne, the new one she'd noticed on his shirts but never questioned, made her stomach turn. "Let me explain." She stepped back, the movement so subtle yet devastating in its finality. The space between them seemed to expand, becoming a chasm 15 years in the making. 15 years, Thomas. Her voice didn't shake, didn't break. It carried the same steady tone she used when explaining complicated procedures to anxious parents. 15 years, and you couldn't even give me the dignity of hearing it from you first. The tears wouldn't come. Not yet. Instead, a cold clarity settled over her, the kind that descended in the operating room when everything went wrong but there was still a life to save. In the background, Patricia tactfully redirected curious onlookers, but all Emma could focus on was the sudden, stark realization that her marriage had been coding for months. She'd just been too busy saving other people's lives to notice. The flat line. Monday morning arrived with brutal efficiency. Olivia strode through Maxwell Technologies, glass doors, her Louboutins clicking against the polished floor with their usual confidence. But the atmosphere had shifted like weather, before a storm. Conversations died as she passed, replaced by the soft whir of copy machines and muffled phone calls. Sympathetic glances turned glacial, and former allies suddenly found their computer screens fascinating. Her office, with its carefully curated view of the bay, felt more like a fishbowl. By 10 a.m., an email from HR appeared in her inbox, with all the subtlety of a cardiac arrest. The meeting was scheduled for 11 a.m., no room for negotiation. "Workplace relationships must be disclosed, Ms. Chen," Gloria Martinez, the HR director, stated without preamble. Her charcoal suit and severe bun projected authority without effort. She slid a document across the mahogany desk, its legal language stark against the white paper, especially when they involve married executives. Olivia's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the armrest, a nervous tell she thought she'd eliminated years ago. "I assume Tomas is receiving the same treatment?" The question came out sharper than intended, betraying her uncertainty. "Mr. Miller submitted his resignation this morning." Gloria's tone remained professional, but something like disappointment flickered across her features, effective immediately. The news hit with physical force, forcing the air from Olivia's lungs. She'd constructed such elaborate fantasies. Thomas leaving Emma, their relationship emerging from the shadows, building a life together. Instead, when she sat alone in a sterile office, watching her carefully constructed plans disintegrate like wet paper. "We're prepared to offer you a transfer to our Seattle office," Gloria continued, pulling out another document. "Or you can tender your resignation. The choice is yours, but it needs to be made today. You haven't touched your carbonara, Sophia observed, watching Emma push handmade pasta around her plate. They sat in their usual corner booth at Vincenzo's, where the owner had discreetly placed them away from curious eyes. A week had passed since the party, and Emma had thrown herself into work with the intensity usually reserved for high-risk surgeries. The dark circles under her eyes told stories of sleepless nights and endless procedures. "And I performed a 12-hour heart transplant today," Emma replied, her fork creating patterns in the sauce. The donor heart almost didn't make it in time. Every minute counted. She didn't mention that counting minutes kept her from counting the years she'd wasted. "Emma." Sophia reached across the table, her hand covering her friend's restless fingers. The simple touch, warm and real, cracked something in Emma's carefully maintained facade. "You can't keep using the OR as an escape. Eventually, you'll have to step out of surgeon mode and feel this." The tears came suddenly, silently, dropping onto the white tablecloth like summer rain. "I keep replaying every moment, Sophia, looking for the warning signs I missed. The late meetings, the changed passwords, the way he stopped sharing the little things first. Did you know he used to call me during lunch just to tell me bad medical jokes?" She wiped her eyes with the linen napkin, leaving smudges of mascara. "I was so focused on becoming department head that I didn't see my marriage flatlining." "This isn't your fault," Sophia said firmly, squeezing her hand. "You were building a career that saves lives. He made his choices. Every single day, he made a choice." Emma pulled a folded document from her purse, placing it on the table between them. The legal letterhead seemed to glow under the restaurant's soft lighting. "I filed the divorce papers today," she whispered, the words hanging in the air like smoke. 15 years reduced to 20 pages of legal terminology. Sophia signaled the waiter for more wine, knowing some wounds needed both time and Chianti to heal. "You know what we're going to do? We're going to order tiramisu, drink this entire bottle, and then I'm going to tell you about the new pediatric anesthesiologist who keeps asking about you." Emma's laugh was watery but real, the first genuine sound she'd made in days. "Matthew Collins. He's just being nice." "He's being interested," Sophia corrected, pouring more wine. "And when you're ready, not now, but someday, that might be worth exploring." Daniel found Thomas in a small coffee shop 3 blocks from the office, the kind of place that prided itself on pour-overs and obscure roasts. The former CEO's presence drew curious glances, but he ignored them, sliding into the booth across from his former employee. Thomas's appearance was a far cry from his usual polished exterior. Wrinkled shirt, unkempt hair, and a 3-day stubble that spoke of sleepless nights. "You look terrible," Daniel observed bluntly, waving away the approaching barista. Thomas laughed humorlessly, the sound hollow and raw. "I deserve worse." He stared into his untouched coffee, the dark liquid reflecting his haggard face. "Probably," Daniel agreed, then leaned forward, his voice dropping. "But wallowing won't fix anything. What's your plan?" "Plan?" Thomas ran a hand through his disheveled hair, making it stand up at odd angles. "I destroyed my marriage, humiliated my wife in front of half of Silicon Valley, and torpedoed my career. I don't think I'm qualified to make plans anymore." Daniel's expression softened, years falling away from his face. "Let me tell you something I've never shared publicly. 20 years ago, I almost did what you did." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. The difference is, my wife caught me before I crossed that line. She gave me a choice, get help or get out. I chose help." Thomas looked up, really seeing his former boss for the first time. The polished exterior of a successful CEO cracked, revealing something more human underneath. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Rockbot Thomas is a foundation you can build on," Daniel replied, sliding a business card across the table. The embossed letters read, "Dr. Sarah Goldstein, Marriage and Family Therapist. This is the number of a good therapist. What you do next is your choice, but you need to understand why you were willing to throw away everything for a fantasy." Thomas stared at the card, a lifeline in a sea of his own making. "I don't know if I can fix this." "You can't," Daniel said simply, "but you can fix yourself. That's where you start." 3 months after the party, Matthew Collins found himself sharing lunch with Emma in the hospital cafeteria. The harsh fluorescent lighting and scent of disinfectant created an odd backdrop for what had become a regular occurrence. As the hospital's lead anesthesiologist, he'd worked countless surgeries with Emma and had witnessed her gradual emergence from the fog of betrayal. "The Anderson kid's recovery is remarkable," he said, referring to their latest successful surgery, a complex procedure that had kept them in the OR for over 10 hours. "His parents couldn't stop thanking you this morning. I think his mother was ready to build a shrine." Emma smiled genuinely, something that had become less rare in recent weeks. The dark circles under her eyes had faded, and some of the tension had left her shoulders. "They should be thanking you too. That was a tricky anesthesia case, one wrong move, and..." She trailed off, both of them knowing the unspoken consequences. Matthew shook his head, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "You know, it's okay to accept praise sometimes, Dr. Miller. Or should I say Dr. Parker?" He referred to her recent return to her maiden name, a change that had been accompanied by a new haircut and a subtle shift in her demeanor. "Still getting used to that," she admitted, then paused, studying him with a mix of curiosity and something warmer. "Matthew, why are you always so nice to me?" He considered his words carefully, aware of the delicate balance between them. "Because everyone deserves kindness, especially when they're rebuilding their life." He spoke from experience, having lost his wife to cancer 2 years prior. "And because you're the best pediatric surgeon I've ever worked with." Personal life aside, Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the mediocre cafeteria coffee. "Thank you," she said softly, allowing herself to accept the compliment without deflection. As they finished their lunch, discussing upcoming surgeries and hospital gossip, Emma realized something had shifted. The weight she'd been carrying since that fateful party had lightened, not gone, but no longer all-consuming. She looked at Matthew, saw the gentleness in his eyes, and felt a flicker of something she thought she'd lost. Possibility. The lakeside park where Thomas and Emma agreed to meet was neutral territory, far from their old shared spaces. Late autumn had painted the trees in vibrant reds and golds, a stark contrast to the steely gray water. Emma found Thomas sitting on a weathered bench, looking older than his years. 6 months of therapy and AA meetings. His drinking had escalated after moving out, had stripped away his corporate polish, leaving something more authentic in its place. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as she sat down, maintaining a careful distance between them. The chill in the air matched the tension between them. "What your email said it was important," Emma replied, watching a pair of ducks glide across the water's surface. She'd debated canceling multiple times, but curiosity and a need for closure had won out. "I'm selling the house," he said, his voice carrying a mix of regret and resolution. "I thought you should know first. You should get half—" "Keep it," she interrupted, surprising herself with the lack of emotion in her voice. "I bought a condo near the hospital. It suits me better now." Silence stretched between them, filled with the rustle of falling leaves and unspoken words. Thomas finally broke it, his voice low and measured. "I've been trying to understand why I did what I did. It wasn't about Olivia. She was just a symptomess. I was empty inside, trying to fill a void with success and validation. When you started succeeding on your own, I felt diminished somehow." Emma's gaze remained fixed on the lake, but her posture softened slightly. "That's not love, Thomas." "No," he agreed quietly. "It wasn't. I didn't love myself enough to love you properly." He paused, gathering courage. "I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance. I just wanted you to know that I understand now, and I'm sorry. Truly sorry." Emma turned to look at him then, really seeing him for the first time in months. The man she'd married was still there, beneath layers of shame and hard-won self-awareness. "Thank you," she said softly. "I hope you find peace, Thomas." As they stood to leave, the distance between them felt less like a chasm and more like the natural space between two people finding their separate paths. Winter had turned to spring by the time Emma signed the final divorce papers. She stood outside her lawyer's office, feeling lighter than she had in months. The city bustled around her, people rushing to appointments and lunch meetings, unaware of the personal milestone she'd just passed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Matthew. "Coffee after your 3 p.m. surgery. I promise not to bore you with anesthesia jokes this time." A small smile touched her lips as she typed back, "Just friends." His response came quickly. "Always, until you're ready for more." Across town, Thomas sat in his therapist's office discussing his upcoming move to Chicago. A fresh start, away from the ruins of his past life. Olivia had already relocated to Seattle, their brief affair ending as quickly as it had begun once reality set in. "Are you running away?" his therapist asked, her tone neutral but probing. "No," Thomas replied thoughtfully. "I'm giving Emma the space she deserves to heal, and maybe giving myself the chance to become someone worthy of the kind of love I threw away." 1 year later, Emma stood at a podium, accepting an award for pioneering a new pediatric surgical technique. The auditorium was filled with colleagues and students, their applause washing over her like a wave. Her gaze swept across the audience, finding Matthew's proud smile in the crowd. They had begun dating 3 months ago, taking things slowly, building a foundation of friendship and trust. In Chicago, Thomas read about her achievement online, feeling a complex mix of pride and regret. He was dating again, cautiously, after completing intensive therapy. His new relationship was built on honesty and self-awareness rather than escape and deception. Back in her office, Emma placed the award beside a photo of her latest successful transplant patient, a reminder of why she'd chosen this path in the first place. Her phone lit up with a message from Sophia. "Dinner tonight to celebrate. Matthew's invited too, of course." As she typed her reply, Emma caught her reflection in the window, confident, successful, and most importantly, at peace. The betrayal that had nearly broken her had instead revealed her strength, teaching her that sometimes the end of one story is simply the beginning of a better one. She glanced at her calendar, noting her dinner plans with Matthew later that week. Life hadn't turned out as she'd planned, but perhaps it had turned out exactly as it should. What did you think of the story? Leave a comment and rate this story from 0 to 10. What rating would you give it and why? 2 buttons will appear next to it. One to subscribe, if you haven't already, and the other to watch other interesting stories. Choose one. Thanks for watching this far. See you soon.